Science fiction, more than any other genre of fiction, has the capacity to tackle enormous questions and have readers rethink our own relationship to the world around us. Science fiction is allegorical, often tackling big morals, philosophies, and political topics. Science fiction is also fun, exploring big, wild, crazy ideas. And when I think about works of fiction, whether that be novels or films or anything else, that have actually changed the way that I see the world around me, had me engaging with the world in a very philosophical way, it's always science fiction. And I've finally read the works of Ted Chiang, an author who, maybe more than any other, has the capacity to change your relationship to the world around you in a single short story. That is miraculous. Ted Chiang is the author of Stories of Your Life and Others, which at the time of recording I have not read, but I know that one of the stories in that collection inspired Denis Villeneuve's movie Arrival, one of my favourite films of all time. And this is Exhalation, a collection of 9 sci-fi short stories by Ted Chiang. I promise that the stories in here have the capacity to change how you think about the world around you. These are stories that can shift your morals, your ethics, your philosophies, your politics, everything. They are truly inspiring, thought-provoking, groundbreaking, world-shifting stories. I have been ordered to read the stories in this collection for a while now, and I finally did, and I get it. Ted Chiang's science fiction is truly otherworldly. His understanding of the complex philosophies of our world and of humanity and what it means to be human is astronomical. So I'm going to talk about my favourite stories in here and what they did for me. Without burying the lead, I'm going to start with the story that changed me the most. It's the penultimate story in the collection and it's called Omphalos. Omphalos is about 35 pages long and it's set in an alternate world where creationism is real. It has been proven, and our protagonist is a devout believer, as most people in this world are because God's been proven to be real, who also happens to be an archaeologist. And she has found the mummified bodies of our progenitors, the original people put on earth by God. And the reason we know these mummies are those people is because they're about 7,000 years old and they don't have any navels. Belly buttons. They were not born of any other person. They were placed here by God. And there are other animals exactly the same, disproving the idea of evolution, proving that each species of animal at some point was placed here by God, and there are progenitors of each of those species that don't have navels. This is a really fun and fascinating setup for a story, but it only gets better from there. In order to talk about the impact of this particular story, I'm going to have to spoil it. I'm not going to spoil any of the other 8 stories completely, so if you're okay with me spoiling just one of these 9 stories, you're safe to watch the whole video. As Omphalos goes along, a lot happens in this 30-page story. Our protagonist ends up going on kind of a quest, a little treasure hunt to find out who's doing a thing that leads to another thing, and those details aren't important. What's important is what she discovers at the end of everything. In the final act of this story, she meets an astronomer who has made a terrifying discovery. See, proving that creationism is real has given humanity an inflated ego, an inflated sense of purpose. We were put here by God, by his design. Therefore, we've been given a purpose from on high. But our protagonist has met an astronomer. And this astronomer has discovered that there is a star, much like our sun, that orbits a planet. There is a planet out there that is completely still, and therefore perfect. It is a planet that doesn't move and instead has a sun that orbits it. And the theory that grows out of this is that that planet, because it has such a proximity to its sun as we do, is home to an intelligent race of people. And they are God's chosen people. This has to be the case because their planet's situation is better than ours, more perfect than ours. And that means one of two things for us. Either we were a prototype, an imperfect people on an imperfect planet in an imperfect solar system, and then God got it right the second time. Or we happened by accident as a byproduct of that planet being created. And the moral and religious ramifications of this are enormous. The astronomer no longer cares, no longer feels a purpose in his life, and our protagonist feels the exact same way. Until at the end, after taking a minute to really think about it, she comes to the realization that she must go on with her job. She must continue in her role as a scientist to discover and understand the world around her, because doing so is its own reward. Rather than doing so to prove God and to get closer to God, to get closer to our origins, to understand our relationship to our Creator better, any of that, discovery in and of itself is a good enough reason to do it. The action is the purpose. To discover is beautiful, is exciting, is fun, is exhilarating, is intellectually stimulating. Just doing something is good enough. Understanding the world better is a wonderful and beautiful thing. Who cares what we will discover, what it will mean, why we're doing it? Just do it. Curiosity is beautiful. I found this entire story, the way that it's structured, its setup, its concept, its execution, and its ultimate moral point to be so enriching. I loved this, and I have to admit in part it's because it reinforces something that I firmly and truly believe. That learning and discovering and creating art, all of these things are good enough things to do in their own right, and they are the heights of human beauty. I am a humanist. I believe in people, our capacity for good, our capacity to learn and discover, educate, create, be beautiful, make beautiful things, all of that stuff. I romanticize all of it and I believe in it. And this story just reinforced that in the most beautiful, gorgeous way by creating a parallel world where creationism is real. I found it amazing. I love this story so much. I also want to talk about the very first story in here, The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate. This story is set in ancient Baghdad. Our protagonist is a merchant who goes into an alchemist's shop. And the alchemist says that he owns several portals. These are metal hoops that you can pass through and you will appear in a slightly different time. The first one he shows the merchant actually just passes you through a few seconds. There's like a time delay between putting your hand in and your hand coming out the other side. But he says that he also owns one that throws you 20 years into the future. And our merchant has to decide whether or not he's going to use that portal and why he should. And so to inspire his curiosity, the alchemist tells the merchant 3 stories about other people who've used the gate. And so this is a Russian nesting doll of tales. In this 30-page story, we get 3 mini-stories. And these are stories that all wrangle with our relationship to free will. Science fiction has done this many times, especially with time travel stories. There are so many paradoxes and ideas that come up when we talk about time travel, and this story is no different, but it's so succinct and satisfying and beautifully written. As he learns these stories, our protagonist has new ethics and morals that he needs to wrangle with before he even decides whether or not he will step through the portal. And the way that it played with my idea of free will was honestly enormous. It kind of proves the idea that there is no such thing as free will. Every decision we make, we were always going to make. We are pre-programmed by the world around us. Our actions, in a sense, are already set in stone. The first story that the alchemist tells is about a man who passed through 20 years in the future to meet his future self. His future self is a wealthy guy, he's done well for himself, and when he meets his younger self, he says, "Yes, I've been waiting for you. I knew you were coming because when I was your age, I passed through the portal and I met my future self, and now I am that future self, and here you are." And so this is a circular event. How could it be anything else? But this means that he was always going to pass through the portal. The third story that the alchemist tells is connected to this first story. It's about the man's wife. It's from her perspective and the crazy things that she got up to when she passed through the portal without her husband ever knowing she did it. And it all reinforces the idea that everything has to happen because it's already happened. It was always going to happen. Nobody passed through the portal for the first time. If he passes through the portal, he meets his old self, and that old self did the same when he was young. It is circular, it is preordained, it is premeditated. Free will doesn't exist. This story blew my tiny little mind. And again, it's not the only story to tackle this kind of a concept, but just the way that it does it, the beauty of its language and execution is so inspiring and comforting and enlightening. And the third and final story from this collection that I want to talk about is the last story in here. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. There are 6 stories in here that I have not touched, and all but one of them was really, really amazing. Ironically, the longest story in here is 100 pages long, and it's the only one I thought was a complete dud. Let me know what you thought about it if you've already read this collection. But this final story is about existential crises. It's set sometime in the future, where a machine has been invented that allows its user to create a split timeline. You press a button on this machine and you create one alternate history, one branching path. And the machine also allows you to communicate with the version of you on that other path. And the longer you have it, because of the butterfly effect, the more you and this other version of you start to diverge. Every time you use it, you communicate with your other self and you learn what they're up to, how their timeline is different from yours. You will make a choice, and there's every chance they'll make a different choice. And you get to see the path that you would have walked if you'd made the choice differently. But this machine has caused a wave, a pandemic of existential crises across the globe. People are in therapy, and one of our protagonists is a therapist for this exact thing. People need therapy to cope with this machine and the existential dread that it gives them, because this story is all about regret. I'm personally full of regrets. There are so many things in my life I wish I'd done differently. Things I said no to when I should have said yes. Things I said yes to and took me down a terrible path when I could have just said no. I'm sure you understand this feeling. I'm sure you're full of regrets. Most of us are. Big ones, small ones, whatever. And that's what this whole story is about. People being able to look at an alternate version of themselves who did the thing differently, got a different result, and where that took them. And maybe becoming jealous of that person. That version of you who did the thing you didn't do or didn't do the thing you did. It is a mind-blowing tale. It is fun, it is exciting, and I won't spoil where it goes, but wow, what a concept. To take existential dread and the anxiety of regret and turn it into a sci-fi story was insane. I won't tell you any more about any of the other stories in here, partly because those were my 3 favorites and I really wanted to talk about them, and partly because I want you to enjoy this collection for yourself. If you already have enjoyed it, please let me know what you thought in the comments, what your favorite story was and the impacts that they had on you, etc. If not, please go out and pick up a copy of Exhalation if you're a sci-fi fan, if you love having your worldview changed, if you love being challenged and thinking about big philosophical stuff. You do not want to miss this collection. Exhalation is phenomenal. Groundbreaking science fiction. Go check it out and subscribe for books.